Abraham was 75 years old, settled, comfortable. He had flocks, servants, a wife he loved. Life in Ur was predictable: markets, trade, family gatherings. He worshipped the gods his father worshipped, never questioning, never searching. Then one night, everything shattered. A voice, not audible but undeniable, spoke into the deepest part of his soul. "Leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you." Abraham's heart stopped. Leave? Go where? Why? The voice continued, relentless and tender. "I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing." Abraham sat up, trembling. This wasn't imagination. This was real, divine, terrifying. Sarah stirred beside him. "What's wrong?" He couldn't answer. How could he explain that an invisible God had just dismantled their entire future? That comfort was over. That the ordinary man he'd been for 75 years was about to become someone he couldn't yet imagine? Morning came. The voice remained. And Abraham knew, whether he understood or not, his life would never be the same. The call had come, and it demanded everything. Abraham tried to make sense of it. He replayed the voice over and over, searching for clarity. "Go to the land I will show you. Not the land I've shown you. Not the land you know. The land I will show you." Meaning, he had to go before knowing, had to obey before understanding, had to trust without a map. Sarah watched him pace their tent, anxiety written across his face. "What did you hear?" she asked gently. "God," he whispered. "I heard God." "Which God?" God, the one above all others, the Creator." Her eyes widened. "And what did he say?" Abraham met her gaze. "He wants us to leave. Leave Ur. Leave your family. Leave everything." Silence felt heavy between them. Sarah's hands trembled. "Nurif, leave? For where?" "I don't know yet." "When do we leave?" "Soon." "Why?" Abraham's voice cracked. "Because he promised to make us a great nation, to bless us, to use us." Sarah looked away, tears forming. A great nation required children, and they had none. She was 65, barren and hopeless. But Abraham's face held something she'd never seen before: conviction mixed with terror, faith battling fear. "If God spoke," she said quietly, "then we go." And the decision was made. Packing felt surreal. Neighbors asked questions Abraham couldn't answer. "Where are you going?" "I don't know yet." "Why are you leaving?" "God told me to." Laughter followed, mockery. Some called him crazy, others pitied him. But Abraham kept packing. He gathered his flocks, his servants, his nephew Lot. He said goodbye to his father's house, to the streets he'd walked his entire life. Sarah wept as they left, looking back at the city disappearing behind them. "What if we're wrong?" she whispered. "What if this is madness?" Abraham didn't answer, because he wondered the same thing, but the voice had been too clear, too powerful, too real to ignore. They traveled west, following no map, just an internal pull Abraham couldn't explain. Days turned into weeks. The landscape changed. Strangers stared at their caravan, and still no destination appeared. Just endless road and endless trust. One night, camped under foreign stars, Sarah asked, "Do you regret it?" Abraham looked at her, then at the vast sky above. "No," he said. "I'm terrified, but I don't regret it." Because deep down, beneath the fear, something else was growing. Not certainty, but faith. And faith, he was learning, didn't require answers, just obedience. Genesis 12:1-4. They reached Canaan, and God spoke again. "To your offspring I will give this land." Abraham built an altar, overwhelmed. The promise was expanding, not just blessing, but land, legacy, a future. But one word haunted him: offspring. He had none. Sarah was barren, years of trying, praying, hoping, nothing. And now God promised descendants. How? Abraham didn't ask, didn't question, he just worshipped. But at night the weight pressed down. He was 75, Sarah was 65. Biologically, time had run out, yet God spoke of nations, plural, not a child, nations. The contradiction was maddening. Faith and logic went to war in Abraham's mind. "Do you see our situation?" he prayed silently. "Do you know we're old? Broken?" Silence. God had spoken the promise. Now came the wait. And waiting, Abraham would learn, was the hardest part of faith. Days passed, months, a year, still no child. Sarah stopped talking about it. The subject became too painful. Servants whispered, neighbors pitied them, but Abraham clung to the words. "I will give this land to your offspring. Not if, not maybe, will." The promise was certain, the timeline, unknown. And in that gap between promise and fulfillment, Abraham's faith would either grow or die. He chose growth, even when it hurt, even when it made no sense. Genesis 12:7. 5 years passed, then 10. The silence from heaven became unbearable. Abraham prayed, but the skies felt closed. He worshipped, but the altars felt empty. He believed, but the belief grew heavier each year. Sarah aged. Her body weakened. Hope faded like color from old cloth. "Maybe we heard wrong," she said one night. "Maybe the promise was symbolic, spiritual." Abraham shook his head. He said offspring. He meant offspring. "Then where are they?" Her voice broke. "Where is even one child?" He had no answer, just faith that felt increasingly foolish. Servants had children. Neighbors had children. Even the animals reproduced with ease. But Abraham and Sarah? Nothing. Barrenness became their identity, the thing people whispered about, the tragedy that defined them. Abraham's nephew Lot had grown distant, their relationship strained by competition and different visions. Loneliness crept in. The promise that once filled Abraham with hope now haunted him with questions. "How long, God?" he prayed. "How long do we wait?" No answer came. Just more days, more months, more empty cradles and silent nurseries. But Abraham kept altars built, kept faith kindled, because giving up on God felt worse than waiting on him, even when waiting felt like dying. Genesis 12-15. Sarah's tears fell in secret. During the day, she was strong, managing the household, leading servants, but at night, alone, she wept. The pain of childlessness wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. In their culture, barrenness meant shame, meant failure, meant God's disfavor. Every pregnant woman she saw felt like judgment. Every baby's cry was a reminder of her emptiness. "Why won't you open my womb?" she prayed desperately. "Why give my husband a promise you won't
Grant me
fulfill
strength
through
in
me?"
this
She felt
solitude.
disqualified,
Guide my path through the
broken,
darkness.
unworthy.
Amen.
Abraham tried to comfort her, but his words felt hollow. "God will provide," he'd say. "When?" she'd ask. "I don't know." "Then how do you know he will?" "Because he promised." Sarah wanted to believe him, wanted to trust. But her body told a different story. She was 70 now. Abraham was 85. Decades had passed since the promise, and still nothing. She watched Abraham pray, watched him worship, watched him cling to hope, and something inside her shifted. Not faith exactly, but desperation. If God wouldn't act, maybe she should. Maybe the promise needed help. Maybe heaven expected human effort. The thought took root, and slowly, dangerously, a plan began to form. A shortcut, a solution. One that would bring temporary relief and permanent regret. Genesis 16:1-2. Every day tested Abraham's resolve. He'd wake before dawn, stare at the empty tent where a child should sleep, and wrestle with doubt. Did I really hear God? The question haunted him. Sometimes the promise felt like a distant dream, other times like cruel mockery. People asked about the promised heir. "Any children yet, Abraham?" He'd force a smile. "God's timing is perfect." But inside, he screamed. Friends offered advice. "Adopt a servant. Make him your heir. Take another wife. Sarah's too old. Maybe you misunderstood the promise." Each suggestion was a knife. Each word of pity, a wound. Abraham's faith became a public spectacle. The man who claimed God spoke to him yet had no proof. The fool who left everything for a promise that seemed empty. But Abraham held on. Not because he felt strong, not because he had answers, but because letting go felt like betraying the voice that had called him. So he chose faith, daily, painfully, even when it made no logical sense, even when his body and circumstances screamed otherwise. Pressure mounted from every side, but deep down, beneath the doubt and fear, something remained unshaken. Not certainty, not confidence, just a stubborn, relentless trust that somehow, someway, God would keep his word. Genesis 15:1-6. Abraham was 99 years old. Sarah was 89. The promise was decades old, gathering dust like a forgotten relic. Abraham still believed, barely. But believing and hoping were no longer the same thing. Hope required imagination, and his imagination had died. He looked at Sarah, frail and weathered, and saw reality. She was too old. He was too old. Biology had spoken its final word. The promise, if it ever came, would have to be through someone else. Maybe Ishmael, the son born through Sarah's servant Hagar. That painful mistake born from impatience and desperation. Abraham had tried to help God, tried to force the promise into reality, and it had brought nothing but heartache, division, and regret. Ishmael was a son, but not the son. Abraham knew it, felt it. Still, he loved the boy, clung to him as the only tangible hope he had. Then God appeared again. After years of silence, the voice returned, clear, strong, undeniable. I am God Almighty. Walk before me faithfully and be blameless. I will confirm my covenant between me and you and will greatly increase your numbers." Abraham fell face down, overwhelmed. God continued, "You will be the father of many nations. I will make you very fruitful." Abraham's heart pounded. Then God said the impossible. "Sarah will bear you a son." Genesis 17:1-19. Abraham laughed. Not from joy, from disbelief. He actually laughed in God's face. Will a son be born to a man 100 years old? Will Sarah bear a child at the age of 90? It sounded absurd, medically impossible, laughably unrealistic. God didn't rebuke him, didn't scold, just repeated the promise. "Yes, Sarah will bear you a son. You will call him Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him." Isaac. The name meant laughter, as if God was acknowledging the absurdity and doing it anyway. Abraham's laughter faded. Wait, God was serious. "But what about Ishmael?" Abraham asked, grasping for something that made sense. "He's already here. Can't the promise be through him?" "No," God said firmly. "Sarah will have a son, and through him the covenant continues." Abraham's mind reeled. Sarah, pregnant at 90? It defied everything. Science, logic, experience. But then again, so had the original call, so had leaving Ur, so had every step of this journey. God had never operated within human limitations. Why start now? Abraham stood, shaking, terrified, thrilled, confused. If this was true, if Sarah truly conceived, it would be the greatest miracle of his life. Proof that God's delays weren't denials, that waiting wasn't wasting, that faith, however long it suffered, would eventually see fulfillment. But first, he had to tell Sarah, and she wouldn't believe him. Genesis 17, verse 17-19. The decision to give Hagar to Abraham had seemed wise at the time, practical, even spiritual. Maybe God needs our help, Sarah had reasoned. Maybe I'm supposed to build a family through her. But the moment Hagar conceived, everything changed. Jealousy poisoned the household. Hagar grew prideful, looking down on Sarah. Sarah grew bitter, resenting the woman she'd chosen. Abraham was caught in the middle, torn between two women, two sons, two futures. Ishmael was born. And for a while, Abraham thought, maybe this is it. Maybe this is the promised son. But God's silence said otherwise. 13 years passed with Ishmael. 13 years of hoping he was enough. 13 years of tension between Sarah and Hagar. 13 years of unresolved pain. Then God spoke and shattered the fragile peace. The son will come through Sarah, not Hagar, not Ishmael. Sarah. Abraham's heart broke for Ishmael. "What about my son?" he pleaded. "Will he be nothing? I will bless him," God promised, "but my covenant is with Isaac." The cost of impatience became clear. Ishmael would be blessed but separated. Loved, but not the heir. Abraham's shortcut had created lasting consequences. Broken relationships, divided families, pain that would echo through generations. And the lesson burned deep. God's promises don't need human help, they need human trust. Genesis 16:21. God appeared to Abraham again, this time with 3 visitors. Abraham didn't know they were angels at first. He just welcomed them with overwhelming hospitality, water, food, rest. Then one spoke. "Where is your wife Sarah?" "In the tent," Abraham replied. "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah will have a son." Inside the tent, Sarah listened, and she laughed. Not out loud, just internally. A bitter, hopeless laugh. She was 90. Her body was ancient. The very idea was ridiculous. "After I am worn out and my Lord is old, will I now have this pleasure?" she thought. Then the voice asked, "Why did Sarah laugh?" Her blood went cold. How did he know? Is anything too hard for the Lord? Sarah's heart stopped. She stepped out, terrified. "I didn't laugh." "Yes, you did." Silence. The question hung in the air. Is anything too hard for the Lord? Sarah had lived decades believing the answer was yes. Yes, some things were too hard, like pregnancy at 90, like reversing biology, like fulfilling impossible promises. But this voice, this presence, demanded a different answer. Sarah looked at Abraham, saw the hope rekindling in his eyes, and for the first time in years, she felt something stir. Not certainty, not confidence, just the faintest whisper of possibility. Maybe, just maybe, God could do the impossible. Genesis 18:1-15. The laughter that had once been bitter turned hopeful. Sarah's doubt wrestled with a growing, fragile belief. Could it really happen? At her age, against all odds. She watched Abraham prepare for the promise, saw him pray differently, not with desperation, but expectation. And slowly, something shifted inside her. Her body, long dead to the possibility of life, began to change. Small signs at first, then undeniable ones. Sarah was pregnant. The household erupted. Servants whispered in awe. Abraham wept openly. This wasn't just a child. This was vindication, proof that God keeps promises, evidence that delays aren't denials. Sarah, once filled with shame, now radiated joy. The barren woman was carrying the miracle. Months passed. Her belly grew. Every kick was a reminder. God had not forgotten. Every movement a promise fulfilled. Neighbors who'd pitied her now marveled. How is this possible? God, Sarah would say simply. Just God. No other explanation needed. No other explanation existed. And when labor began, Sarah wasn't afraid. She was 90 years old, giving birth for the first time. It should have been terrifying, but all she felt was overwhelming gratitude. Because the God who delayed had also delivered. The God who tested had also blessed. And the son born that day wasn't just Isaac. He was living proof that faith, however long it waits, always wins. Genesis 21:1-7. Isaac's birth was a celebration that lasted for days. Abraham threw a feast. Sarah laughed, this time with pure, uncontainable joy. God has brought me laughter, she declared. Everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. The boy grew strong, healthy, perfect. Everything Abraham and Sarah had dreamed of and more. He was their miracle, their proof, their future. Abraham couldn't look at Isaac without marveling. Every step the boy took, every word he spoke, it was all impossible made real. Sarah nursed him, sang to him, held him close. After decades of empty arms, she finally had a son. The promised son, the covenant child. Years of sorrow melted away. The shame was replaced with honor, the mockery with respect. Abraham and Sarah had waited a lifetime, but now, holding Isaac, it felt worth it. Every tear, every doubt, every sleepless night, all of it, worth it. The household flourished, peace returned, hope blossomed. Isaac became the center of everything, the reason they'd endured, the proof that God's timing, though painful, was always perfect. Abraham thought the hardest part was over, thought the testing had ended, thought faith had finally earned its reward and could now rest. He was wrong, because just when joy settled in, just when peace felt permanent, just when the future seemed secure, God spoke again, and this time the words would shatter everything. Genesis 21:1-8. Abraham. The voice came in the night, unmistakable and heavy. Here I am, Abraham replied, sitting up. Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering. Silence. Abraham's heart stopped. He couldn't have heard that right. Sacrifice Isaac, his son, the promised child, the miracle. This had to be a mistake. A test of hearing. Anything but what it sounded like. But the voice was clear, undeniable, unbearable. Sacrifice him. Abraham sat frozen, mind screaming. Why? After everything, waiting, believing, enduring, why this? Isaac was the promise, the entire reason for the journey, the proof that God keeps his word. And now God wanted him dead? It made no sense. Destroyed every assurance Abraham had clung to, shattered every theology he'd built. How could God ask for the very thing he'd given? How could the promise require the destruction of the promise? Abraham looked at Sarah, sleeping peacefully beside him. How could he tell her? How could he explain that the God who gave them Isaac now demanded him back? He couldn't, wouldn't. This was between him and God. A test so severe, so brutal, that no one else could carry it. Abraham didn't sleep that night. He just sat in the darkness, wrestling with the most impossible command he'd ever received. Genesis 22:1-2. Morning came too soon. Abraham rose quietly, trying not to wake Sarah. He gathered wood for the burnt offering, called 2 servants, saddled his donkey. Then he woke Isaac. We're going to worship, he said, voice steady despite the storm inside. Isaac smiled, trusting. Where? Mount Moriah. Sarah kissed them both goodbye, unaware this might be the last time. Abraham couldn't look at her, couldn't risk breaking. As they walked, Abraham's mind raced. Every step toward the mountain felt like betrayal. Betrayal of Sarah, of Isaac, of the promise itself. But the command was clear. And Abraham had learned one thing in decades of walking with God. Obedience wasn't optional, even when it made no sense, even when it cost everything. Isaac chatted happily, unaware. The servants walked behind, oblivious, and Abraham carried the weight alone, the knife hidden, the plan unspoken, the agony buried deep. 3 days they traveled, 3 days of torture, 3 days of Isaac's innocent laughter echoing in Abraham's ears. 3 days of questioning everything. Why, God? Abraham prayed silently. Why give him only to take him away? Why fulfill the promise only to destroy it? No answer came, just the command, just the mountain ahead, just the unbearable task waiting. And Abraham kept walking. Because faith, he'd learned, doesn't require understanding, just obedience. Genesis 22:3-5. Abraham didn't sleep during those 3 days of travel. How could he? Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Isaac's face, heard his laughter, felt the weight of what was coming. Memories flooded him. Isaac's birth, his first steps, his first words, the way he looked at Abraham with complete trust, complete love. And now Abraham was leading him to death. The servants noticed his silence but said nothing. Isaac asked questions about the journey, the worship, the sacrifice. Each question was a knife twisting deeper. "We'll see, son," Abraham would answer. "God will provide." The words felt like ash in his mouth. On the third night, camped at the base of Mount Moriah, Abraham sat alone while Isaac slept. He stared at his son, so peaceful, so trusting, so alive. "I can't do this," Abraham whispered to God. "I can't kill him. He's everything. The promise, the future, my son." But the command remained, unbending, unrelenting. Abraham wept silently, tears soaking his beard. This wasn't just sacrifice. This was the death of everything he'd believed in. If Isaac died, the promise died. If the promise died, what had the last 25 years meant? What had the waiting been for? Yet even in his agony, Abraham knew God had never failed him. Not once, not ever. Even when delayed, even when tested, God had always been faithful. "I don't understand," Abraham prayed, "but I trust you." And that trust, fragile and trembling, was all he had left. Morning came like an executioner. Abraham woke Isaac gently. "Time to go." Isaac stretched, yawning. "Are we almost there?" "Almost." Abraham told the servants to stay behind. "The boy and I will go up the mountain. We will worship and then come back to you." The words caught in his throat. "We will come back." Was that faith or denial, hope or lies? He didn't know anymore. Isaac carried the wood. Abraham carried the fire and the knife. They walked in silence, climbing the rocky path toward the summit. Finally, Isaac spoke. "Father?" Abraham's heart clenched. "Yes, my son? The fire and wood are here, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" The question shattered him. Isaac's innocent, trusting voice asking the one question Abraham couldn't answer. Abraham stopped walking, looked at his son, and spoke the truest words he'd ever said. "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." He didn't know if he believed it, didn't know if it was faith or desperation. But he said it, and they walked on together, father and son, obedience and innocence, climbing toward a moment that would define everything. The mountain loomed ahead, and Abraham's faith hung by a thread. But he didn't turn back, didn't run, didn't refuse. He just kept walking, one agonizing step at a time. Genesis 22:6-8. They reached the top. Abraham built the altar with trembling hands, stacking stones mechanically, trying not to think. Isaac helped, cheerful and unaware. "This is a good spot, Father," he said. Abraham couldn't respond. His throat was too tight. When the altar was ready, Abraham turned to Isaac. Their eyes met. And in that moment, Isaac saw something. Fear, pain, love, desperation, all tangled together. "Father?" Abraham's voice cracked. "Isaac, I." He couldn't say it, couldn't explain, so he just reached for him. Isaac didn't resist, didn't understand, just trusted. Abraham bound him gently, hands shaking violently, laid him on the wood. Isaac's eyes went wide. "Father, what are you doing?" "I'm sorry," Abraham whispered. "I'm so sorry." Tears streamed down his face. Isaac started to struggle, confusion
Oh, look
turning
at
to
this
fear.
little one.
"Father,
A true
please."
blessing.
Abraham
So
raised the knife.
precious.
His whole body
Indeed.
shook. His heart screamed in protest. Everything in him wanted to stop, to run, to refuse. But the command was clear, and Abraham had chosen obedience. Even when it killed him, even when it made no sense, even when it required the unthinkable. He looked at Isaac one last time, saw the terror, the betrayal, the love, and lifted the knife higher. This was it. The moment faith became absolute. The moment trust became total. The moment obedience became sacrifice. Abraham closed his eyes and brought the knife down. Genesis 22:9-10. "Abraham." The voice split the sky like thunder. His hand froze midair, the knife inches from Isaac's chest. "Abraham." "Here I am," he gasped, shaking. "Do not lay a hand on the boy. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son."
Look over there,
Abraham
buddy.
collapsed, the knife clattering to the ground.
It's a special
Sobs poured from
bird.
his
See it?
chest.
Yes.
Relief, agony, confusion, gratitude all pouring out at once. Isaac scrambled off the altar, terrified and trembling. Abraham grabbed him, holding him so tight the boy could barely breathe. "I'm sorry," Abraham wept. "I'm so sorry." But even through the tears, understanding began to dawn. God never wanted Isaac dead. He wanted Abraham's heart fully surrendered, wanted
Please
to see if
forgive
Abraham
me for
loved
my
the gift
sins.
more than the
I
giver.
beg for your mercy.
Wanted
Do not
proof that
abandon me.
obedience would override even the deepest love. And Abraham had passed, not because he was strong, not because he understood, but because he trusted, fully, completely, painfully. Abraham looked up, eyes blurred with tears, and then he saw it, thicket, a ram, provided, exactly as he'd told Isaac. God himself will provide. And he had, not the way Abraham expected, but in the way that proved faith was never in vain. Abraham sacrificed the ram and worshiped through his tears. Genesis 22, verse 11 to 13. The angel called again, "Because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies, and through your offspring, all nations on earth will be blessed because you have obeyed me." Breathless. The promise wasn't just renewed, it was multiplied, expanded, secured forever, because of obedience. Isaac sat nearby, still shaken but alive. Abraham reached for him, and the boy came willingly, burying his face in his father's chest. "I don't understand what just happened," Isaac whispered. "Neither do I," Abraham admitted. "But I know this: God is faithful, even when he tests us, even when he asks the impossible." They descended the mountain together. The servants waited at the bottom, confused by the change in Abraham's face. He looked different, lighter, freer, not because the test was over, but because he'd passed. And in passing, he'd discovered something profound. God's delays aren't punishments, they're preparations. His tests aren't to destroy, they're to develop. His requests aren't to take, they're to teach trust.
My son, I
Abraham had
must
spent
obey.
decades waiting
Father,
for Isaac.
I am ready.
Do
and
not lay a
seconds
hand
willing
on
to
the
give him
boy.
back. And in that
I will
surrender,
keep this
God
safe.
had given him more than a son.
Yes, please hide it.
He'd given him a
It
legacy,
is hidden now.
an eternal covenant, a faith that would outlive him. Genesis 22:15. Abraham's name spread across nations, not because of his wealth or power, but because of his faith. People whispered about the man who'd left everything on a promise, who'd waited decades for
I
a
have
son,
waited for this
who'd been
moment.
willing to sacrifice
Rise,
that
faithful
son when
one.
God asked.
I am
His
ready.
story became legend, proof that obedience unlocks blessing, that faith, however tested, always wins, that God's timing, though painful, is always perfect. Isaac grew into a man, carrying the weight of what happened on that mountain. He'd been the sacrifice offered, the promise tested, and through him, the covenant would continue. Abraham grew old, but his legacy didn't fade. It multiplied, just as God promised. Through Isaac came Jacob. Through Jacob, 12 tribes. Through those tribes, a nation. And through that nation, eventually, the Savior of the world. Every step traced back to one man's yes, one man's willingness to trust when trust made no sense, one man's obedience when obedience required everything. Abraham died in faith, having seen the promise begin, but not complete. But that was enough, because he understood what many never do. Faith isn't about seeing the end, it's about trusting the one who does. His journey from ordinary man to father of nations proved one eternal truth. When God delays, he's not denying, he's preparing. And what he prepares always exceeds what we could ask or imagine. Hebrews 11:8-12. Generations later, people still told Abraham's story, in tents, in temples, in moments of doubt and despair. "Remember Abraham," they'd say. "Remember how long he waited. Remember what he was willing to give. Remember that God never failed him." His faith became a standard, a benchmark, a reminder. When promises seemed delayed, they thought of Abraham. When obedience felt impossible, they remembered the mountain. When hope faded, they recalled Isaac's birth. Abraham's life became a roadmap for trust. His mistakes, warnings, his victories, encouragement. His journey, proof that God honors faith. The covenant God made with him didn't die with him. It multiplied through centuries, through kings and prophets, through exile and return, through silence and revelation. Until finally, in a small town called Bethlehem, a baby was born, a descendant of Abraham, the ultimate fulfillment of the promise. Through your offspring, all nations will be blessed. Jesus, the seed of Abraham, the lamb God provided, the sacrifice that ended all sacrifices. And on a mountain called Calvary, another father watched his son die. But this time, no angel stopped it. This time, the knife fell, because the ram caught in the thicket on Mount Moriah was only a shadow, a preview of the real sacrifice to come. Abraham's faith pointed forward to a greater test, a greater obedience, a greater love. Galatians 3:16. Abraham's obedience on Mount Moriah didn't just secure his blessing, it shaped the spiritual DNA of everyone who came after him. His willingness to trust, even in absolute darkness, became the foundation of faith itself. The Apostle Paul would later write, Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. Not works, not perfection, just belief. That same faith flows through every believer today. When we wait on God's promises, when we obey despite confusion, when we trust beyond understanding, we're walking in Abraham's footsteps. His legacy isn't just biological, it's spiritual. He fathered not just a nation, but a way of living, a way of trusting, a way of surrendering. Children aren't just born from his bloodline, they're born from his faith. And his faith teaches us delay doesn't mean denial, testing doesn't mean abandonment, sacrifice doesn't mean loss, God's silence doesn't equal God's absence. And obedience, however painful, always leads to blessing. Abraham's story is our story. His God is our God. His promise is our promise. And his faith, that's our inheritance. Not earned, not deserved, just received. Because the same God who called Abraham out of Ur is calling us out of comfort. The same God who tested Abraham on Moriah is testing us in our mountains. And the same God who blessed Abraham will bless us. When we trust him, when we obey him, when we wait on him. Romans 4:16-25. The key to Abraham's story isn't how fast God moved. It's how faithful Abraham remained while waiting. 25 years passed between promise and fulfillment. 25 years of silence, doubt, mistakes, and hope. But God wasn't late. He was preparing Abraham's character, preparing Sarah's faith, preparing a testimony that would outlast them both. What God delays, he perfects. The wait wasn't punishment, it was process. Every year of barrenness built dependence. Every moment of doubt refined trust. Every test strengthened faith. By the time Isaac arrived, Abraham wasn't the same man who'd left Ur. He was transformed, mature, ready. And the blessing that came wasn't just a child, it was a legacy powerful enough to change history. God's delays serve purposes we can't see. They remove what we don't need, develop what we do, expose what's false, establish what's true. If Isaac had come immediately, Abraham might have trusted the gift more than the giver. But the wait taught him, God is enough. Even without the promise fulfilled, God is enough. That lesson, learned through decades of delay, made Abraham unshakable. And when the test came on Mount Moriah, he didn't hesitate, because he'd already learned to let go, already learned to trust, already learned that God's faithfulness isn't measured by speed, it's measured by certainty. What he promises, he performs. Not always quickly, but always perfectly. Genesis 15:6. Abraham's story ends with one truth echoing through eternity. Faith that waits will always win. Not because waiting is easy, but because the God we wait on is faithful. Every promise delayed was a promise deepened. Every test endured was character forged. Every moment of obedience was a seed planted for future generations to harvest. Abraham became the father of faith, not because he never doubted, but because he kept believing anyway. Not because he never failed, but because he kept obeying anyway. Not because the journey was easy, but because he finished it. And his reward? More than he could imagine. A son, a nation, a legacy, an eternal covenant, a name that would never be forgotten. But more than that, intimacy with God, the kind that only comes through testing, through waiting, through surrendering. If you're waiting on a promise today, remember Abraham. If you're being tested, remember the mountain. If you're tempted to give up, remember Isaac's birth. God hasn't forgotten you. His delay isn't denial. His silence isn't absence. His testing isn't punishment. He's preparing something greater than you can see. Something worth the wait. Something that will outlast your lifetime. So hold on. Keep believing. Keep obeying. Because faith that waits, it always wins. Every single time.